Learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. Amidst the hustle and bustle of life, there is a gentle yet profound invitation, a whisper that transcends all the storms within the soul. Learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. This teaching of Jesus Christ is not a distant command, but a sharing, a warm handshake, leading us to the harbor of peace. In a world that constantly promotes the self, strength and prominence, meekness and humility seem to be forgotten virtues. But Jesus lived and demonstrated that true strength lies not in power or domination, but deep within a gentle heart, a soul that knows how to bow in service. Meekness is not weakness, but the ability to remain calm and gentle in the face of adversity. Humility is not self-deprecation, but the recognition of one's true value in relation to God and others. To learn meekness from the Lord is to learn to face criticism with tolerant silence, to respond to anger with a gentle smile. To learn humility from Him is to learn to rejoice in the joy of others, not to exalt oneself, but to be willing to lower oneself to lift up our brothers and sisters. It is the path that leads to inner serenity, where our souls find true rest, no longer bound by the burdens of pride and self-love. As a philosopher once contemplated, the deeper the river, the quieter it is, the riper the rice, the lower it bows. The teaching of Jesus Christ is the same, inviting us to dive deep into the silence of the soul to harvest the seeds of peace and love. Let His meekness and humility permeate our lives, so that every step we take becomes light, and every glance we give is filled with compassion. The invitation, "Learn from me," is not just a piece of advice, but opens up a whole path, a journey to discover the hidden treasures in the meek and humble heart of the Lord. These are not lofty philosophies for saints, but simple, accessible principles of life that have the power to transform our souls from the very depths. As we walk this path, we will realize that the peace we have long sought is not far away, but lies right in the practice of His teachings. Below are philosophies drawn from that wellspring of gentleness and humility, each a candle illuminating the hidden corners of the soul, accompanied by stories where the teacher's words were spoken in the midst of everyday life. Before we begin, we kindly invite you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel to help spread this valuable content to your family and friends. We thank you, and now we invite you to listen. 1. True strength does not roar, but is silent like water, seeping deep into the earth. This lesson teaches that meekness is not synonymous with weakness. On the contrary, it is the strength of self-control, the ability to restrain anger and maintain gentleness in the face of provocation. Roaring strength can destroy, but silent strength has the power to nurture and build. On the dusty road to Jericho, a wealthy merchant in a hurry pushed the Apostle Peter down. Peter, being hot-tempered, immediately jumped up, clenching his fists, ready to react. Jesus gently placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Peter, look at that river. During a storm, it roars and sweeps everything away, but then it runs dry. But the underground stream flows silently, unnoticed, yet it makes a whole region green. Do you want to be a fleeting flood or a life-giving spring?" Hearing this, Peter slowly unclenched his fist, and the anger in his heart subsided. 2. Humility is the courage to see yourself in the light of truth, no more, no less. This is not self-deprecation or lowering oneself, but a clear awareness of one's position, value, and limitations before God and all creation. The humble person does not need to show off because they know who they are, and they are at peace in that truth. A certain scribe, wanting to test Jesus, asked a tricky question about the law in front of a crowd. After Jesus answered wisely, the man, still not satisfied, began to boast about his many years of studying the scriptures. Jesus smiled gently. "Sir, your knowledge is like a large basket full of books. But humility is the key that opens that basket to get food for the soul. Without the key, you are just carrying a heavy burden." 3. The greatest hand is not the one holding a scepter, but the one that stoops to wash another's feet. The measure of greatness in the kingdom of God is the complete opposite of the world's. Power lies not in how many people serve you, but in how many people you have served with a loving heart. During the Last Supper, the apostles were arguing about who was the greatest among them. Seeing this, Jesus silently stood up, took a towel, tied it around his waist, then knelt and began to wash each of their feet. John, seeing his master doing this, said with concern, "Lord, why are you doing the work of a servant?" Jesus looked up at him, his eyes full of affection. "John, whoever wants to be the head must learn to be the feet. Whoever wants to be exalted must find joy in the lowest place. For the teacher came not to be served, but to serve." 4. The soul finds true rest only when it casts off the burden of the ego. Pride, self-love, and the desire for recognition are the invisible burdens that make our souls weary and restless. Only when we lay down our ego can we receive the light peace that the Lord gives. A woman named Martha was bustling about, preparing a lavish meal to welcome the Lord, while her sister Mary sat at his feet, listening to his words. Martha felt annoyed and said to the Lord, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone?" Jesus looked at her with compassionate eyes. "Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things. The burden you are carrying is not this meal, but the burden of wanting to make everything perfect in the eyes of others. Sit down here, cast off that burden, and let your soul rest like Mary's." 5. To win a person with gentleness is more glorious than to conquer an army with swords. Confronting with anger only breeds more hatred. But a gentle answer, a tolerant gesture, can melt the hardest of hearts, turning an enemy into a friend. That is the victory of love, the only victory that brings lasting peace. When the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery before Jesus and demanded she be stoned, they wanted to trap him. The crowd was seething with murderous intent. Instead of arguing, Jesus just quietly bent down and wrote on the ground with his finger. When they kept pressing him, he looked up and said calmly, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Those gentle words were more powerful than thunder. They struck the conscience of every person. They quietly left, one by one, and his gentleness saved a life without the need for a sword. 6. A humble heart is the most fertile ground where the seeds of wisdom can sprout. Pride hardens the mind, making it unable to receive new things, especially spiritual truths. Only when we humbly realize that there is much we do not know, do we truly open our hearts to learn and become wiser. The Apostle Thomas, a rational man, asked Jesus, "Lord, how can we know the way to the Father?" Jesus answered, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Thomas was still pondering the specifics. Jesus then said, "Thomas, do not try to draw a map to heaven with your mind. Let your heart become humble like an empty plot of land. Then my footsteps will naturally mark the path for you." 7. Forgiveness is the noblest act of a humble soul. Only a humble person realizes that they too are a sinner in need of forgiveness. Therefore, they can easily sympathize with and forgive the mistakes of others. Holding on to resentment is a manifestation of pride, wanting to place oneself in the position of a judge. Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times?" He thought that 7 times was a very generous number. Jesus looked at him and replied, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Seeing Peter's astonishment, he added, "Peter, every time you forgive your brother, you acknowledge that you have been forgiven much more by the Father in heaven." Forgiveness is not a burden, but a liberation for your own soul from the prison of resentment. 8. Learn to listen to the whisper of a child, for in their simplicity is hidden the kingdom of heaven. Adults are often dominated by complex calculations, prejudices, and ambitions. Children, with their innocent humility and trust, can receive great truths most easily. To be humble is to become like a child before God. The apostles were shooing away some children who wanted to come near Jesus. When he saw this, he was displeased and told them, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." Then he took a child in his arms and said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." 9. The tree that bends in the storm is the tree that survives. The rigid reed will be broken. This philosophy speaks of the flexibility and patience of the soul. A meek person does not rigidly cling to their own opinions or honor. They are willing to bend, to yield a step, to patiently endure to preserve harmony and overcome storms. The rigidity of the ego is the cause of breaking. On the Sea of Galilee, a sudden storm arose, and the boat was tossed violently. The apostles, who were experienced fishermen, were terrified. They woke Jesus, who was sleeping. He awoke and commanded the wind and the sea to be still. Then he turned to them and said, "Why are you so afraid? Do you not see the reeds by the shore? They bend before the wind, but do not break, because they know when to bow. So too with your souls, learn to be meek before the trials of life, instead of resisting with pride only to be broken." 10. Peace is not the absence of trouble, but the presence of humility in the midst of the storm. True peace does not depend on external circumstances. A person can be in the midst of a battle and have peace in their heart, while another can be in a palace and have a storm in their soul. This peace comes from complete trust and surrender to God, an ultimate act of humility. On the night before he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus' soul was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He prayed to the Father. The apostles nearby fell asleep. When he returned and found them sleeping, he did not scold them, but said gently, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." An apostle asked him how he could be so calm in the face of what was to come. Jesus replied, "My peace is not like the peace of the world. The world's peace is when all is quiet. My peace is that even when everything around you collapses, you know you are held in the Father's hand. It is the peace that comes from saying yes, not why." 11. Gratitude is the breath of a humble soul. The proud person always thinks they deserve to receive, so they rarely feel they have enough. The humble person, however, sees everything, from a breath to a piece of food, as a gift. Gratitude arises from that humility, and it turns life into a series of small miracles. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus healed 10 men with leprosy. They joyfully ran to show themselves to the priests. But only one, a Samaritan, returned, fell at his feet, and thanked him. Jesus looked at him, then asked his disciples, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to the Samaritan, "Rise and go. Your gratitude has not only healed your flesh, but has saved your soul." 12. Patience is an expression of faith, trusting that a seed needs time to sprout under God's care. Meekness is not passivity, but active patience. The proud person wants immediate results and easily gets angry when things don't go their way. The meek person understands that good things take time to mature, and they trust in the providence of the Almighty. When the Samaritan villagers did not welcome Jesus, the brothers, James and John, said angrily, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" Jesus turned and rebuked them, then said gently, "The Son of Man did not come to destroy, but to save. You want a rain of fire, but my Father wants a gentle rain to water the ground. Be patient, for love needs time to soak into the driest of lands." 13. It is better to keep the peace than to hold on to your own reasoning. The ego always craves to be proven right, but humility teaches us that a harmonious relationship is far more valuable than winning an argument. Sometimes, silence and yielding are the wisest answers. Among the apostles, Matthew, the former tax collector, and Simon, the zealot who hated tax collectors, often had disagreements. One day, they argued heatedly about a detail in the law. Seeing the tension, Jesus called them over and said, "Which of you is right is not as important as whether you are still brothers. Reason can divide, but love will heal. Be humble enough to see that your unity as brothers is more precious than your own rightness." 14. Giving secretly is the act of a heart that does not seek rewards on earth. True humility does not need the applause or recognition of the world. It finds joy in the very act of giving, knowing that the most valuable reward is the pleasure of the Father, who sees what is done in secret. Jesus was sitting opposite the treasury in the temple, watching how the crowd put their money in. Many rich people put in large amounts. But then a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins. He called his disciples to him and said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. Her humble offering is more pleasing to God than all the ostentation." The Fool. 15. To know how to bow and accept correction is a sign of a growing soul. Only the humble dare to admit they are wrong and are willing to change. Pride builds walls to protect the ego, blocking all feedback. Meekness opens the door for truth to enter and heal. When Jesus foretold his passion, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said. "This shall never happen to you." Instead of praising Peter's good intentions, Jesus turned and said to him sternly, "Get behind me, Satan, for you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." That frank correction, though painful, helped Peter understand that humility is about accepting God's path, not imposing one's own will upon him. 16. The humble person does not block the light of others, but rejoices to see them shine. Envy arises from pride and insecurity. The humble person, knowing their own worth in God, does not feel threatened by the success of others. On the contrary, they know how to lift others up. The disciples of John the Baptist came to him and complained that everyone was going to Jesus. Instead of being sad, John smiled and said, "He must become greater. I must become less." Later, when Jesus heard this, he said to the crowds, "Among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. He was so humble that he rejoiced in being a lamp that dims before the true light." 17. Finding joy in obscurity is also a form of humility. The world seeks attention, the spotlight, and fame. But the humble soul finds peace and strength in quiet work, in places no one notices, because they do everything for God, not for men. A resident of Capernaum asked Jesus, "Teacher, with your power, why don't you go to big cities like Rome or Alexandria to preach instead of staying in these small fishing villages?" Jesus looked at the boats moored by the lake and replied, "The best seed does not need to be sown in the square, but in the soil that is ready to receive it, even in the most hidden corner. My Father sees what is done in secret, and my joy is to please him." 18. A sincere apology is a bridge built by humility to mend what is broken. The proud ego would rather die than admit fault. But a meek soul understands that admitting a mistake and apologizing does not make one smaller, but greater. It is a courageous act to heal a relationship. Andrew and Bartholomew had a misunderstanding that caused them not to speak to each other. Jesus knew about it and told them the parable of the unforgiving servant. Then he said, "Each of you has been forgiven a debt of 10,000 talents by the Father in heaven. So why can you not forgive each other a debt of 100 denarii? Andrew, be humble enough to say you're sorry. Bartholomew, be meek enough to accept it. For the bridge of reconciliation must be built from both sides." 19. Humility is treasuring the small things, for everything great begins from them. The world often overlooks the small things, but Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven works like yeast in dough, like a tiny mustard seed. The humble person knows how to find value and beauty in the gestures, the people, and the things that the world considers ordinary. One day, Jesus saw a carpenter meticulously carving a small wooden peg. A disciple wondered, "Teacher, why does he spend so much effort on such a small thing?" Jesus replied, "Because he knows that without this small peg, the large cart cannot be sturdy. Likewise, the kingdom of heaven is built with countless humble acts of love. Never underestimate a small deed done with great love." 20. Complete dependence on God is the pinnacle of humility. Pride is the illusion that we can control everything by ourselves. Humility is the truth that we need God in every breath. This complete surrender is not a weak submission, but a powerful act of trust. In the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the most terrible cup of suffering, Jesus prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me." That is the truth of human fear. But then he continued, "Yet not as I will, but as you will." This statement is the most profound lesson on humility. Placing God's will above one's own, trusting that his path, though painful, is the path that leads to life. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 21. The meek person is not easily offended, for they do not build their castle on the sand of praise and criticism. A proud soul is very sensitive to criticism because its worth depends on the evaluation of others. The meek person has a steadfast self-possession because their worth is anchored in the unchanging love of God. The words of the world are just like a passing wind. When the Pharisees called Jesus a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, the disciples were very angry and wanted to defend their teacher. Jesus remained very calm. He said to them, "A physician comes to heal the sick. Do people call him a friend of sickness? Do not worry about the names people give me. Only care about whether the Father's work is being done." The truth does not need to shout to defend itself. 22. Humility is knowing how to take a step back so that others can move forward. In a world that vies for the front row, humility teaches us the joy of supporting others from behind. It is the strength of a teacher who rejoices when their student surpasses them. After Jesus multiplied the loaves, the people wanted to make him king. It was an opportunity to gain worldly power. But instead, he withdrew to a mountain by himself. When the disciples found him, they asked why he had refused. He replied, "My kingdom is not built with thrones, but with transformed hearts. I step back so that you can learn to stand on your own by faith, not by my physical presence." 23. Meek silence has more power than 1,000 arguments. There are times when silence is not agreement or powerlessness, but a powerful response. It is the silence that refuses to engage in fruitless debates, the silence of tolerance in the face of slander, and the silence of one who believes that the truth will eventually speak for itself. Before the Sanhedrin, when the chief priests and elders brought many false witnesses to accuse him, Jesus remained silent. The high priest, Caiaphas, had to ask impatiently, "Are you not going to answer?" His silence made their accusations seem empty and ridiculous. He taught his disciples that there are battles that are won by not fighting. 24. Humility is being willing to learn from those whom the world considers the lowest. Pride only wants to learn from the famous and powerful. Humility opens the heart to receive wisdom from all sources, including a beggar, a child, or a social outcast. On the way, Jesus met a blind beggar named Bartimaeus. He shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But Jesus stopped, called him over, and asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" He showed his disciples that the cry of a beggar on the roadside was as important and worthy of listening to as the words of a master in the synagogue. He learned from him a lesson in unwavering faith. 25. Meekness is the strength to endure injustice without letting one's heart turn bitter. Enduring injustice is difficult, but to endure without letting resentment and bitterness gnaw at the soul is even more difficult. It is a miracle of meekness, turning pain into empathy and the one who harms you into an object of prayer. While hanging on the cross, amidst physical agony and the humiliation of the crowd, Jesus uttered a prayer. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." This prayer is the pinnacle of meekness. He not only endured, but turned his suffering into an act of love and forgiveness, protecting his soul from the poison of hatred. 26. The humble person does not compare themselves to others, but only compares today's self with yesterday's self. Comparison is the seed of pride, when one sees oneself as better than others, or inferiority, when one sees oneself as less than others. The humble person focuses only on their own journey, striving to become better each day in the light of God's teaching. A rich young man asked Jesus how to gain eternal life. After hearing Jesus advise him to sell all his possessions, he went away sad. The disciples whispered to each other that it was very difficult to be saved. Jesus said, "Do not look at another's path and judge. Each person has their own journey. You just worry about walking your own path and strive to love the Father more today than yesterday. That is the only race that matters." 27. Sincere hospitality is an expression of humility, considering the guest more important than oneself. Humility is not just an internal attitude, it is expressed through action. Opening one's home and heart to welcome a stranger, a little one, is to welcome Christ himself, and to put the needs of others above one's own comfort. When he came to the house of the two sisters, Martha and Mary, Jesus taught a lesson on hospitality. Martha was busy serving, while Mary sat listening. The Lord did not criticize Martha's work, but he praised Mary's choice. He meant to say that the most precious hospitality is not a lavish feast, but the humility to give one's time and attention to the guest, to be truly present with them. 28. Meekness is knowing how to use power to lift up, not to crush. When one has power or advantage, the greatest temptation is to use it to dominate others. The meek person understands that all authority is given by God, and it must be used as a tool to serve, to protect the weak, and to heal wounds. When Jesus healed a man possessed by a demon, he demonstrated extraordinary power. But afterward, he did not use that power to force the people to believe. Instead, he told the healed man, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and has had mercy on you." He used power to set a person free, then gave that person the freedom to bear witness, not to create a forced cult. 29. Humility is recognizing that one's work, whether great or small, is a collaboration with God. The proud person thinks that success is due to their own talent. The humble person knows that they are just a worker, an instrument in the hands of the great Creator. Their joy lies not in the final result, but in being able to participate in His work. A farmer boasted to Jesus about his bountiful harvest, detailing his hard work of plowing and sowing. Jesus smiled and said, "You are right. Your effort is truly valuable. But who made the rain fall and the sun shine? Who made the seed sprout from the earth? You are a wonderful collaborator. Rejoice in that, and be humble enough to know that without my Father, all your effort would be in vain." 30. The final rest of the soul is to dissolve into the infinite humility of God's love. This is the final philosophy and the goal of the entire journey. All practices of meekness and humility lead to one point: the complete abandonment of the self to be filled by God. It is perfect peace, free from anxiety and fear, because the I that causes storms is no more, only His love remains. In His final words to the disciples, Jesus said, "Remain in my love." John asked, "How can we remain?" Jesus answered, "As a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it remains in the vine, neither can you. Humbly recognize that your life comes from me. Let my lifeblood, which is meekness and love, flow through you. Then you will no longer live for yourselves, but I will live in you. And that is the true rest I have promised." 31. Humility is embracing one's own broken pieces and believing that God can use those very pieces to create a new vessel. Perfection is an illusion of pride. Humility is the courage to accept our imperfect selves, with all our weaknesses and failures. It is not condoning mistakes, but believing that God's grace is stronger than our greatest brokenness. After denying the teacher 3 times, Peter fled in torment and shame. When the resurrected Jesus appeared by the shore, Peter did not dare to look him in the eye. Jesus did not mention his sin, but only asked gently 3 times, "Simon, do you love me?" After each of Peter's answers, he gave him a mission: "Feed my sheep." He told him, "Peter, your old self is broken, but do not despair. It is through the cracks of weakness that the Father's light can shine most brightly. Use the understanding you have learned from this fall to support your brothers." 32. The meek person does not add fuel to the fire, but brings the cool water of calmness. In conflicts, the natural instinct is to react, to respond to anger with greater anger. But meekness is a supernatural strength, capable of absorbing negativity, cooling hot heads, and creating space for reconciliation. In a marketplace, a Roman soldier knocked over an old woman's fruit stand. He did not apologize, but shouted at her. The crowd gathered, and angry words began to fly. The apostle Simon the Zealot, with his hatred for the Romans, clenched his fists. But Jesus stepped forward. He said nothing to the soldier, but quietly bent down to help the old woman pick up the oranges. His calm action made both the soldier and the crowd stop in their tracks. He then whispered to Simon, "Anger is like a fire. You cannot put it out with another torch. Always be the water." 33. The courage to say, "I need help," is one of the most genuine expressions of humility. Pride whispers to us that we must always appear strong and independent. But humility is the wisdom to realize that we were created to live in community, to need each other. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but the strength to build connection. The disciples were trying to row a boat across the lake against a strong wind. They exhausted themselves, but the boat did not get it far. Jesus was sleeping in the back of the boat. They were hesitant to wake their teacher, trying to prove their own ability. Only when the waves were about to swamp the boat did they cry out in fear, "Teacher, save us! We're going to drown!" He woke up, calmed the sea, and then turned to them, not to scold their weak faith, but to scold their pride. You tried in your own strength until you were exhausted. You only needed to humbly recognize your limits and call out. I was always here with you. 34. Humility is preserving inner integrity rather than one's outer image. The world cares about reputation, about what others think. The humble person cares about the truth of the soul, about the purity of thought and motive that only God sees. They would rather be misunderstood by the world than betray their own conscience. The Pharisees often prayed loudly at street corners and put on a somber look when they fasted to be praised by men for their piety. Jesus taught the disciples, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door and pray to your Father, who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." Do not be like the hypocrites. A humble soul before God is more precious than 1,000 praises from men. 35. Meekness is the strength to plant a garden in the desert instead of cursing the desert. When faced with difficult, negative circumstances, pride gives birth to resentment, blame, and despair. Meekness, with patience and hope, seeks to bring life and beauty even to the most barren places. When passing through Samaria, a land considered barren in faith by the Jews, the disciples showed their displeasure. John said, "There is nothing good here." But Jesus sat by a well, patiently starting a conversation with a despised woman. His conversation sparked faith in the whole village. He told his disciples, "You see a desert, but I see a field waiting to be sown. Do not curse the darkness. Humbly become a small spark of light. 36. Humility is being grateful even for unanswered prayers, believing that God's silence is also a wise answer. Pride demands that God act according to its own will and timing. Humility accepts that human understanding is limited and trusts that the Father in heaven always knows what is best, even when his answer is no or wait. The two sisters, Martha and Mary, sent word to Jesus when their brother Lazarus was gravely ill. But Jesus did not come immediately. Lazarus died. When he arrived, Martha said with a hint of reproach, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus, though he also wept, replied, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory." By not answering the initial plea, he prepared for an even greater miracle, teaching them a lesson in trusting his plan, even when it surpassed their understanding. 37. Meekness is choosing the path of the peacemaker, a path often hated by both sides but blessed by God. In a polarized world, the peacemaker is often viewed with suspicion. One side thinks you are a traitor. The other side thinks you are untrustworthy. It takes great meekness and courage to stand in the space in between, to endure misunderstanding in order to heal divisions. Matthew, the tax collector for the Romans, invited Jesus to his house for a feast with many other tax collectors and sinners. The Pharisees muttered to the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus heard them and replied, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." He placed himself between the two opposing sides, the religious leaders and the outcasts, to be a bridge for them, despite being criticized by both. 38. Humility is the ability to see the image of God even in those who hurt us. This is one of the greatest challenges of humility. Our nature is to see the devil in our enemies, but faith teaches us that every person, no matter how lost, still carries a spark of the Creator within them. Seeing that spark is the first step toward being able to love our enemies. When the soldiers came to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter drew his sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. Jesus immediately stopped him. "Put your sword back in its place." Then he touched the servant's ear and healed him. In the most tense moment, facing those who came to arrest him, he still saw a person who was hurt and needed healing. He taught Peter that even an enemy is a person worthy of love. 39. True joy is the fruit of a humble soul. It does not depend on circumstances, but stems from union with God. The world's happiness is like a leaf blown by the wind of circumstance, but the joy of the humble is like a tree with roots deep in the living water. Even if there is a storm above, below there is peace and nourishment. The apostles Paul and Silas, though beaten and chained in a prison in Philippi, sang hymns to God in the middle of the night. They learned this lesson from their teacher. Jesus, even at the Last Supper, knowing all the suffering that was to come, told his disciples, "I have told you this, so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete." His joy did not come from the absence of suffering, but from his intimate union with the Father. 40. Meekness is using words to heal, build, and encourage, aware that every word has the power of life or death. Pride uses words as a weapon to criticize, belittle, and judge. Meekness uses words like a gardener's tool to pull out the weeds of doubt, to water the seeds of hope, and to fertilize the young plant of faith. A sinful woman came to anoint Jesus with perfume, and those around began to whisper, judging her past. Instead of agreeing, Jesus turned to the woman and spoke words of comfort. "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." To her critics, he told a parable to open their hearts. He used his words as a shield to protect the weak and as medicine to heal a broken soul. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 41. Humility is daring to be true to who you are, without wearing any masks, even if it makes you vulnerable. The world teaches us to build strong facades. But Jesus teaches us that authenticity, though fragile, is the path to freedom and true connection. Only when we dare to show others our true selves can we be truly loved. Nicodemus, a member of the Jewish ruling council, had to come to Jesus at night out of fear. He did not dare to openly profess his faith. Jesus welcomed him, did not mock his timidity, but patiently explained to him about being born again. Years later, it was Nicodemus who courageously came forward with Joseph of Arimathea to see to Jesus' burial. The humility to be true to his initial doubts led him to great courage. 42. Meekness is understanding that silence is sometimes the most profound respect for another's pain. When faced with someone who is suffering, pride often rushes to offer cliché advice or theological explanations. Meekness is different. It knows that what is needed most at that moment is not words, but presence. A compassionate silence can say more than 1,000 words of comfort. When Jesus' friend Lazarus died, he arrived and saw the sisters Martha and Mary weeping. The Bible records a very brief but profound detail. Jesus wept. He did not begin with a sermon on the resurrection. He began by humbly and fully sharing their grief. He taught us that before the pain of others, we should first learn to be silent and weep with them. 43. Humility is accepting the limits of the body and mind, and knowing when to rest. Pride pushes us to work ceaselessly, viewing fatigue as a sign of weakness. Humility reminds us that we are not God. We need rest. We need to recharge. Rest is not laziness, but a humble act of respecting God's creation in our bodies. After the disciples returned from their mission, they joyfully reported all they had done. They were very enthusiastic. But Jesus saw their fatigue and said, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." He understood that a healthy soul needs a rested body. He taught them that working for the Lord also includes humbly taking care of the instrument the Lord has given them. 44. Meekness is the strength to hold on to faith in goodness, even when surrounded by evil. When evil is rampant, it is easy to become cynical and bitter. But the meek person, while seeing clearly the evil of the world, still perseveres in believing in a higher reality, that the love and goodness of God will ultimately triumph. This belief gives them the strength not to be assimilated by the darkness. In the parable of the weeds, the servants wanted to immediately pull up the weeds that grew among the wheat. But the master said, "No, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest." Jesus taught the lesson of God's meekness. He is patient with the existence of evil, not because he is powerless, but because he trusts in the vitality of the good seed, and he does not want to harm it. 45. Humility is treasuring the question more than the answer. Pride always wants to have the final, definitive answer for every problem. Humility, on the other hand, is comfortable living with mysteries, with the unknown. It understands that a sincere question can open a spiritual path, while a hasty answer can close it. An expert in the law asked Jesus, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Instead of giving a direct answer, Jesus asked him back, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" By doing so, he did not just give an answer. He invited the expert to embark on a journey of self-discovery. He respected the question and the intellect of his interlocutor, an act of pedagogical humility. 46. Meekness is letting go of the need to control the outcome and focusing only on the act of love in the present moment. We often worry about the results of our actions, about whether they will be successful. Meekness teaches us that our duty is to faithfully sow the seeds of love. How that seed grows is up to God. This frees us from the burden of anxiety. When Jesus sent out the 72 disciples, he said, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." He did not promise that every place they went would welcome them. He only gave them the task to go. Later, when they returned rejoicing that even the demons submitted to them, he directed them to a more humble joy. "However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." 47. Humility is finding dignity in the work that the world considers most mundane. The world divides work into noble and menial. Humility teaches that any work done with love and dedication has a sacred dignity. The carpenter, the cleaner, the cook are all participating in the building of the world. Jesus, during the first 30 years of his life, lived a silent life in the village of Nazareth, working as a carpenter. He did not begin his ministry with great miracles, but with the humility of daily labor. He sanctified manual work, teaching us that greatness lies not in titles, but in faithfulness in small things. 48. Meekness is the ability to distinguish between accepting God's will and being passive in the face of evil. This is a subtle distinction. Meekness does not mean standing by with folded arms in the face of injustice. Jesus was very meek, but he also resolutely overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple. Meekness is to resist evil, but not with hatred, but with a love for truth and justice, and always being ready to suffer for it. When the Pharisees questioned Jesus about healing on the Sabbath, he did not remain silent. He looked at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, and still healed the man with the shriveled hand. He taught that loyalty to the love of humanity must rise above soulless rules. It was a holy anger, rooted in love, not in a wounded ego. 49. Humility is laughing at oneself, recognizing the absurdity of pride and the loveliness of human imperfections. A person who takes themselves too seriously is often proud. Humility brings a lightness, an ability for self-deprecation. It helps us not to dramatize our failures and to look at life with a more tolerant smile. When the disciples argued about who was the greatest, Jesus did not rebuke them harshly. Instead, he called a child over and placed the child among them. That action, besides its profound meaning, also had a touch of humor. It was as if to say, "You grown men are fighting over things this child doesn't even care about. Look how absurd your solemnity is." He used a gentle contrast to make them realize their own foolishness. 50. The ultimate philosophy. Meekness and humility are not virtues to be acquired, but the very nature of God into which we are invited to dissolve. This journey is not about becoming a perfect person with all the virtues. This journey is one of constant surrender, so that our small ego fades away, making room for the presence of God Himself. Meekness and humility are just other names for love, a love that empties itself for others. The final destination is no longer I practicing humility, but Christ lives in me. After the resurrection, when He appeared to the disciples who were behind locked doors for fear, the first words Jesus spoke were, "Peace be with you." That peace was not a wish, but a gift of His very self. The presence of the one who had walked the ultimate path of self-emptying from the manger to the cross now brought a peace that the world could not take away. He did not say, "See how gloriously I have triumphed." He simply breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." It was the breath of new life, a life woven from the very infinite meekness and humility of God. 51. Humility is not emptying oneself, but realizing one is already empty, and only God can fill the void. This is the difference between asceticism of the ego and spiritual truth. To empty oneself is still an act of proud will. Humility is a letting go, a confession that without grace, we are just an empty vessel. This very recognition is the invitation for God's power to enter. At the wedding at Cana, when the wine ran out, Mary did not command Jesus what to do. She humbly presented the need. "They have no more wine." Then she turned to the servants and said a sentence containing absolute trust. "Do whatever he tells you." She pointed out the emptiness and trusted. After the miracle, Jesus explained to John, "Miracles do not begin from human fullness, but from emptiness, humbly entrusted to the Father." 52. Meekness does not impose truth, but lights a lamp and invites others to come closer to see for themselves. Truth is not a club to beat others with. Meekness understands that faith is a personal encounter, not a forced surrender. It respects the freedom of others and believes that the light of truth has its own attraction, without needing the violence of words. When meeting Zacchaeus, the tax collector, Jesus did not stand under the tree and shout, "You sinner, come down." He just stopped, looked up, and gave a personal invitation. "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." It was that gentleness and respect that broke through his defensive shell, leading to a voluntary conversion. Afterward, he told the disciples, "You cannot open a flower bud with a hammer. Use the sunshine of compassion." 53. Humility is silently shouldering a part of another's burden without them knowing and not considering it a debt. Helping visibly is good, but humility goes further. It shares the spiritual and emotional burdens of others in the silence of prayer. It is the act of taking the pain of others into one's own heart and offering it to God. A disciple named Thaddeus felt helpless before the constant sorrow of a widow in the village. He asked Jesus, "Teacher, what should I say to her? All words seem empty." Jesus replied, "Don't speak. Sit with her. Set aside a corner of your heart to carry her sorrow and offer it to the Father in silence. When you humbly carry a part of another's burden, you are also allowing me to carry your own." 54. True obedience is not a blind act, but a humble listening to discern and follow the voice of love. Obedience is not abandoning reason, but placing reason under the illumination of a higher wisdom. It requires deep listening, a sensitivity of the soul to distinguish between the will of a loving God and the demands of human power. When people asked Jesus whether it was right to pay taxes to Caesar, they wanted to trap him between obedience to Roman law and Jewish patriotism. He did not answer yes or no blindly. He asked to see a coin and said, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." He taught a lesson in humble obedience. Fulfill your earthly duties, but your highest loyalty and ultimate obedience must always be to God. 55. Meekness is daring to be foolish before the world by believing in a wisdom that the world cannot understand. The world has very clear standards for success, wisdom, and righteousness. The meek person is willing to abandon those standards to walk the path of the gospel, a path that often seems irrational and foolish in the eyes of the world, like loving one's enemies or giving without expecting anything in return. When Jesus spoke of eating his flesh and drinking his blood to have life, many disciples were shocked and said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" And they left. Jesus turned to the 12 and asked, "You do not want to leave too, do you?" Peter, on behalf of the group, responded with an act of humble faith in the face of this foolishness. "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." 56. Humility is finding the sacred in the most ordinary things: a piece of bread, a glass of water, a smile. Pride always seeks great signs, extraordinary experiences. Humility has the eyes to see the presence of God in the most mundane and simple realities of daily life. For the humble soul, nothing is ordinary. At the Last Supper, Jesus did not choose any symbol of power to leave to his disciples. He took the most ordinary things on the table, bread and wine, and turned them into eternal signs of his presence. He took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and said, "This is my body." He taught that if we have the humble eyes to see, we can encounter God in our daily meals. 57. Meekness is the strength to start anew each day, not letting yesterday's failures define today's person. The ego remembers mistakes very well and is often paralyzed by guilt. Meekness understands the nature of mercy. It knows that every morning is a new opportunity, a blank page given by God. It allows us to get up after every fall with renewed gratitude. After Peter denied the teacher, he wept bitterly. He could have lived the rest of his life in torment, but the risen Lord would not let him. He sought him out, gave him the chance to profess his love 3 times as a new beginning. Jesus taught that meekness is not never falling, but always having the courage to get up and walk on in grace. 58. Humility is relinquishing the right to judge and handing that right back to God alone. Human nature loves to classify, label, and judge others. It is a way for the ego to feel superior. Humility is a conscious abdication from the judgment seat in one's own mind, and an admission that only God sees into every soul. The parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector praying in the temple is a classic lesson. The Pharisee stood up, listed his merits, and judged the tax collector. The tax collector stood at a distance, beat his breast, and asked for mercy. Jesus concluded, "This man, rather than the other, went home justified before God." He taught that the moment we begin to judge others is the moment we condemn ourselves with pride. 59. Meekness is understanding that one's weakness can be a doorway for God's power to be shown. The world worships strength and hides weakness. The kingdom of heaven operates on a reverse logic. When we humbly admit our powerlessness, we create a space for God's power to work most powerfully. A man came to Jesus to heal his son, who had seizures. He said through tears, "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." Jesus replied, "If you can, everything is possible for one who believes." The father immediately exclaimed with a cry that contained both faith and weakness, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." It was his humble confession of weakness in faith that opened the way for the miracle. 60. Humility is the ability to receive, not just to give. Pride loves to be in the position of the giver, the benefactor, as it brings a sense of power and control. Humility understands that receiving a gift, help, or a compliment is also an art. It requires humbling oneself, admitting a need, and appreciating the kindness of others. When Mary Magdalene anointed Jesus' feet with expensive perfume, Judas grumbled about the waste. But Jesus defended her and received her act completely. He said, "She has done a beautiful thing to me." By humbly allowing himself to be served, he taught the disciples that love is a two-way exchange. Sometimes, allowing others to love us is also a way to love them. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 61. Meekness is gentleness with those who doubt, knowing that doubt can be part of the faith journey, not its opposite. The natural reaction to another's doubt is defensiveness or attack. Meekness has the patience to walk alongside, to listen to the questions, and to believe that a sincere doubt is closer to the truth than a superficial faith. The Apostle Thomas declared he would not believe until he touched Jesus' wounds himself. When Jesus appeared, he did not scold him for his stubbornness. Instead, he invited gently, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Stop doubting and believe." He met Thomas's doubt with a loving invitation, turning doubt into one of the greatest professions of faith. My Lord and my God. 62. Humility is the courage to walk one's own path, even if that path is narrow and few travel it. Pride seeks the safety and consensus of the crowd. It fears being lost, being seen as different. Humility brings the inner freedom to listen and follow the call God has for oneself, even if it means going against the world's trends. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." This invitation requires the humility to abandon easy paths, the truths accepted by the majority, and the courage to trust in a path that seems more difficult, but is the path of truth. 63. Meekness is letting go of the past, not letting it hold you hostage, and not using it as a weapon against others. The ego is often bound by past hurts or uses the past mistakes of others to control them. Meekness practices radical forgiveness, forgiving others and forgiving oneself. It lives fully in the present, the only place where God's grace is found. When the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, they were using her past to trap Jesus. Jesus did not play their game. He bent down and wrote on the ground, as if erasing all accusations. Then he said, "Then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." He broke the chains of the past and gave her a completely new present. 64. Humility is understanding that one is only a steward, not the owner of what one possesses. From talents and wealth to time and life itself, the humble person recognizes that all are entrusted by God to manage. This awareness frees us from anxious clinging and greedy hoarding. It turns every action into responsible service. In the parable of the talents, the master entrusted his property to his servants to manage before he went on a journey. He did not give it to them permanently, but entrusted it. The humble and wise servants made a profit from what was entrusted. The lazy and proud servant hid it out of fear. Jesus taught that our attitude toward the talents God gives us will determine our eternal reward. 65. Meekness is finding strength in unity, not in supremacy. Pride wants to be the only one, the best, needing no one. Meekness understands that the strength of the community is far greater than the strength of the individual. It rejoices in being part of a body, where each member is important and supports the others. Before ascending to heaven, Jesus prayed a fervent prayer for his disciples, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us. He did not pray for any of them to be the greatest. He prayed for unity. He knew that the disciples' power to witness to the world lay not in the individual talents of Peter or John, but in their love and unity with one another. 66. Humility is the art of listening with the whole heart, not just with the ears. Listening with the ears is to gather information. Listening with the heart is to connect with another soul. It requires setting aside prejudices, pre-formulated answers, and truly opening one's heart to understand the inner world of the person opposite. When the two disciples on the road to Emmaus were sad about Jesus' death, the risen Lord joined them and walked with them. He did not begin by declaring, "I have risen." He began with a humble question. "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" He let them pour out their hearts, their disappointment, their sorrow. Only after listening with his whole heart did he begin to explain the scriptures to them. 67. Meekness is the courage to say no to the demands of the world in order to say yes to the call of God. The world always has its agendas, expectations, and pressures on us. Meekness is not about pleasing everyone. On the contrary, it has an inner strength to refuse what goes against one's core values and calling, even if it may cause offense. When Jesus' family and relatives thought he was out of his mind, they came to take him away. But he answered, "Who is my mother, and who are my brothers?" Then he looked at those listening to his word and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." He taught a lesson on the absolute priority of the Father's will. 68. Humility is the peace of not needing to understand everything. The human intellect always craves an answer to every why question. Why is there suffering? Why do good people suffer? Humility is the ability to trust in God's goodness, even without satisfactory answers. It is peace in mystery. Job, after losing everything and suffering immensely, questioned God. God did not directly answer his why questions. Instead, he showed Job his greatness and wisdom in creation. In the end, Job exclaimed, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Humility took him from demanding an explanation to contemplating a presence. 69. Meekness is not erasing one's identity, but allowing one's identity to be purified and shaped by love. Many people fear that humility will make them lose their personality. But the opposite is true. The proud ego is what distorts and hides our true selves. When that ego is chiseled by meekness, the unique, wonderful person that God created us to be can truly shine. Jesus did not turn his disciples into clones of each other. Peter was still impetuous, John still contemplative, Thomas still rational. But he purified those personalities. Peter's impetuosity became zeal. John's contemplation became depth of love. Thomas's rationality became the foundation for a solid faith. Meekness does not destroy, it perfects. 70. The ultimate philosophy. Humility is the home of the great silence, where the soul no longer speaks, but only listens to the voice of love speaking its name. After all the efforts, all the practices, the destination of the journey of humility is a deep silence. It is not an empty silence, but a silence filled with the presence of God. In that silence, the ego no longer makes demands, the mind no longer analyzes, and the soul simply is in God, like a drop of water that has returned to the ocean. On Mount Tabor, when Jesus was transfigured, Peter hastily wanted to say something, to do something. "Let us put up 3 shelters." But a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." The final advice is not speak or do, but listen. It is the invitation to enter the humble silence of listening, where we meet God and find true rest for our souls. 71. True freedom is not doing everything you want, but being freed from the you that always wants. The world defines freedom as the ability to follow every whim of the ego. But the paradox of the gospel is this, that ego is the biggest prison. True freedom, the liberation of the soul, comes only when we humbly recognize our slavery to desires, fears, and prejudices, and allow God to free us from ourselves. A rich young man came to Jesus. He had all the freedom the world desires. He asked, "Teacher, I have kept all the commandments. Why is my heart still restless?" Jesus looked at him with love and said, "You are free to go anywhere, but you are a prisoner of your wealth. You are free to say anything, but you are a slave to your reputation. Do you want to be truly free? Humbly recognize your chains, then come, follow me. Freedom is not in possessing, but in letting go." 72. Humility is living fully in this moment, for the past is enveloped in mercy, and the future is in the hands of a provident Father. The ego never lives in the present. It either gnaws on past regrets or worries about future uncertainties. Only humility has enough trust to let go of both ends and live fully in the present moment, the only place we can encounter God. When Jesus came to Martha's house, she was busy worrying about the upcoming meal, annoyed about things not yet done. He gently said to her, "Martha, you worry about the meal an hour from now. You are annoyed about the laziness of a minute ago. You are everywhere except here, right now, with me. Peace is not in tomorrow or yesterday. It is a seed that only sprouts in the humble soil of now." 73. Meekness is loving a person the way one gazes at a star, appreciating its beauty without ever intending to pluck it down for oneself. The love of the ego always tends to possess, control, and turn others into property. Meek love is a free love. It loves for the good of the beloved, rejoices in their joy, and grieves with their sorrow, without demanding that they meet one's own needs. It is non-attached love. From the cross in his final agony, Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved. He did not cling to earthly ties. Instead, he performed an act of non-possessive love. "Woman, here is your son," and to John, "Here is your mother." He humbly let go of his most sacred relationship to create a new spiritual family, teaching us that the purest love is the love that knows how to give away. 74. Humility is the ability to see a failure not as a dead end, but as a loving redirection from God. Pride views failure as a personal humiliation. Humility sees it with the eyes of faith, believing that even in the broken plans of humans, God's great plan is still being fulfilled. Failure can be a closed door that allows us to see another, better door opening. After a night of unsuccessful fishing, Peter and his companions were washing their nets in frustration. Jesus got into Peter's boat and after teaching said, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Peter, with the humility of a professional accepting advice from a carpenter, replied, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." That humble obedience after a failure led to a miraculous catch of fish, and more importantly, a new calling. 75. Meekness is the strength to build a bridge over the rushing waters of division, even knowing that one might be swept away. The act of a peace builder requires great self-emptying. It requires us to abandon our own side, to listen even to views we detest, and to find the smallest common ground to start building. It is a risky meekness. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, the priest and the Levite both passed by. They had reasons not to stop: fear of defilement, fear of danger. They protected the purity and safety of their own side. But the Samaritan, an enemy of the Jews, humbly crossed all barriers of race and religion. He himself became the bridge, connecting the life of the injured man to the safety of the inn, even though it cost him time, money, and his own safety. 76. Humility is shedding the armor of cynicism and skepticism, and daring to believe in goodness again. Hurt and disappointment in life often make us put on the armor of skepticism for self-protection. It takes great humility to dare to take off that armor, to dare to be vulnerable again, and to believe that love and goodness still exist, even if one has been betrayed before. After the resurrection, the disciples returned to their old fishing trade, perhaps with hearts full of doubt and brokenness. Jesus appeared on the shore, but they did not recognize him. He asked if they had any fish and directed them to a miraculous catch. When they came ashore, they saw he had already prepared a fire and breakfast. He did not scold their weak faith. He simply nurtured them, a gentle act inviting them to humbly believe in goodness once again. 77. Meekness is not the absence of conviction, but presenting one's convictions gently, leaving space for dialogue and for the Holy Spirit to work. Many confuse meekness with being wishy-washy, not daring to stand up for the truth. But Jesus always stood firm in the truth. The difference is that he did not use the truth as a weapon. He presented it as an invitation. The meek person speaks the truth in love, not with the arrogance of wanting to win. When confronting the Pharisees, Jesus often used parables. He did not say directly, "You are arrogant." Instead, he told a story about two sons sent by their father to work in the vineyard. By doing so, he did not shut down the conversation. He opened a space for them to look at themselves and realize the truth, a pedagogical method of meekness. 78. Humility is the quiet joy of being an anonymous thread in God's great tapestry. Pride wants to be the center of the tapestry, the most prominent pattern. Humility finds happiness in knowing that, though small and hidden, it contributes to the beauty of the whole. It does not need to be credited, does not need to be noticed, only to know that it is in the right place where God wants it to be. When the disciples argued about who would sit at his right and left in the kingdom, Jesus spoke of drinking the bitter cup and serving. Then he concluded, "But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." He taught them to humbly focus on being a faithful thread, while the arrangement of positions in the great tapestry is God's affair. 79. Meekness is inner stillness, not stirred by praise, nor shaken by criticism. The proud soul is like the surface of the water. Just a gentle word of praise or criticism is enough to create ripples of elation or sadness. The meek soul is like the bottom of a deep lake. Even if there are storms on the surface, the bottom remains still, because it has found its center in God, not in the opinions of others. When the crowds hailed Jesus as he entered Jerusalem, he remained calm on the donkey, knowing that this same crowd would be shouting for his crucifixion a few days later. He did not let the praise make him proud, nor the condemnation make him bitter. He taught us the lesson of equanimity of a soul that is completely free. 80. Humility is the ability to see a person's value not through what they do, but through the truth that they are loved by God. The world values people based on achievement, status, usefulness. Humility has a penetrating gaze, a God's eye view. It looks at a sinner, a failure, a sick person, and sees not a problem to be solved, but a person unconditionally loved by God. When Jesus was at the house of Simon the Pharisee, a sinful woman came and wept, washing his feet with her tears. Simon saw only a sinner, but Jesus saw a heart that loved much. He said to Simon, "Her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown." He taught Simon the humble lesson of seeing others through the eyes of mercy, not the measure of righteousness. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 81. Meekness is patience with the process, trusting that spiritual growth is like a tree, which cannot be forced but can only be cultivated. The ego wants instant enlightenment to reach the peak immediately. Meekness understands that the soul needs time to grow. It is patient with stubborn bad habits, slow progress, and periods of spiritual dryness. It trusts in the silent work of grace. In the parable of the sower, Jesus spoke of the seed falling on different types of soil. He did not speak of a magical seed that grows instantly. He spoke of a process. It needs good soil, time, and care to overcome thorns and birds. He teaches us to be humble and diligent farmers of our soul's soil, and to patiently wait for God to give the growth. 82. Humility is the courage to live with unanswered questions and to find peace in trust itself. The proud intellect cannot tolerate uncertainty. It wants a perfect system, an answer for everything. Humility is the maturity to accept that there are mysteries beyond human comprehension, and that faith is not having all the answers, but the ability to live well even without them. Jude, not Iscariot, asked Jesus, "But Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not to the world?" It was a logical question about God's plan. Jesus did not give a strategic answer. He replied, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home, the home sometimes with them." He shifted the question from the why of the intellect to the how of the heart. The path is not to understand, but to love. 83. Meekness is not a lack of passion, but directing one's passion towards eternal things. People often think the meek are gentle and passive. But Jesus was the most passionate person, passionate for the kingdom of heaven, for the truth, for the abandoned. The difference is that his passion did not serve his ego, but the will of the Father. Meekness is a controlled and well-directed fire. When Jesus saw the commerce in the temple, he did not gently advise. He acted with a holy wrath, overturning tables, driving out the sheep and cattle. The disciples remembered the scripture, "Zeal for your house will consume me." That is the passion of meekness, not angry because one is offended, but angry because the love for what is holy has been offended. 84. Humility is recognizing that the shortest path to another person is through God. When we want to help or change someone, we often try to influence them directly with words and actions. But the humble person knows that the most effective way is first to bring that person to God in prayer. Let God work in their heart and in ours first, and then the encounter will take on a different dimension. Before calling Lazarus from the tomb, Jesus looked up to heaven and prayed aloud, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." He did not perform the miracle by his own power. He publicly showed that his action stemmed from his relationship with the Father. He taught that all our service must begin by connecting with the source of all power and love. 85. Meekness is daring to let others help you and realizing that this is also a gift you give to them. When we allow others to help us, we are humbly admitting our weakness. But at the same time, we are also giving them the opportunity to practice charity, to feel useful and appreciated. Refusing help out of pride is also depriving others of a joy. When Simon of Cyrene was forced to help carry Jesus' cross, he might have done it reluctantly. But Jesus, in his extreme weakness, humbly accepted that help. He, who carried the sins of the world, allowed a man to carry a part of his physical burden. He gave Simon an honor he could never have imagined. 86. Humility is simplicity of heart, a heart no longer distracted by 1,000 cares, but focused on the one thing necessary. The modern world pulls us in countless directions. Humility is an act of focus, of simplifying life and soul. It asks a fundamental question: what is truly important? And it courageously eliminates the non-essential to protect the core. In the story of Martha and Mary, Jesus said, "But only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." He did not say Martha's service was bad. He pointed out that among the many good things one can do, there is one thing necessary: the humble presence with the Lord. Simplicity of heart is the key to finding that better part. 87. Meekness is the ability to endure misunderstanding in silence, trusting that time and truth are the best advocates. When misunderstood or slandered, the ego's first reaction is to defend, explain, argue. Meekness has the strength to endure that injustice and entrust one's reputation to God. It believes that living righteously is more persuasive than 1,000 words of self-defense. Throughout his passion, from the house of Caiaphas to Pilate's praetorium, Jesus was almost completely silent in the face of accusations. Pilate was surprised. "Do you not hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But he gave no reply. His silence was not powerlessness, but the freedom of one no longer bound by the need to prove himself right before the world. 88. Humility is becoming invisible, so that the work of God may be visible. The proud leader wants to leave their own mark. The humble servant wants to erase their mark, so that people can see God more clearly through the work they do. Their goal is not, "Look at me," but "Look at what the Lord has done." John the Baptist is a perfect model. When his disciples were jealous because the people were following Jesus, he spoke the immortal words, "He must become greater. I must become less." He understood that his role was just to prepare the way, to be the finger pointing to the Messiah. His greatest joy was to become obscure when the true light appeared. 89. Meekness is the courage to walk on water, not by faith in one's own strength, but by faith in the teacher's outstretched hand. The most audacious steps of faith do not come from self-confidence, but from extreme humility. It is the recognition that one is completely helpless and can only do extraordinary things when completely surrendered to the power of another. When Peter saw Jesus walking on the water, he said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." He took a few steps, but when he looked at the wind and waves instead of at Jesus, he began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. He taught that humility is not staying in the boat, but daring to step out, and when afraid, humbly crying for help. 90. The supreme philosophy. Humility is the golden key that opens the gate of the kingdom of heaven, a gate so low that no one who holds their head high can pass through. All the philosophies, lessons, and practices converge on this final image. The kingdom of heaven is not a reward for pride or talent. It is a gift for the little souls. The way into the kingdom is a way down, a path of self-emptying. The lower one bows, the closer one gets to the gate. Jesus concluded the Sermon on the Mount with the image of building a house on rock and on sand. The house on the rock is the house of the one who hears and puts into practice his words, the teachings on humility, poverty, and meekness. He told his disciples, "Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." That is not advice, but a condition. The gate of the kingdom of heaven is the height of a child, and only those who humbly bow down can enter the eternal home of the Father. So our contemplative journey through 90 philosophies of meekness and humility has come to its final moments. 90 philosophies are not a list to be memorized, but 90 doors inviting us to step deeper into the heart of Jesus Christ, to learn from him and find true rest for our souls. The purpose of this program is not for us to know a lot, but for us to live deeply. Because understanding humility is just a shadow, but living humility is a reality. Therefore, the call to action from Church Audio today is simple. Don't try to embrace all 90 philosophies. Just choose one single philosophy, one that has truly touched your heart during this journey. Write it down, post it where you can easily see it, reflect on it every day, and try to practice it this week. Perhaps it's the philosophy of silence, of gratitude, or of the courage to apologize. Just one small step, one humble act, is enough to create a great transformation in your soul, and most especially please leave a comment below, letting us and the whole community know. Which number philosophy have you chosen to live by this week? Your sharing is not just a promise to yourself, but also a testimony and a source of encouragement for many others walking this journey. If this program has brought you a little peace, a moment of reflection, please do not hesitate to press the like button and share this video with souls who need to listen. And if you are new here, please press the subscribe button and the notification bell to continue with us on meaningful spiritual journeys in the future, to build together a space of silence and prayer amidst our busy lives. Once again, Church Audio sincerely thanks you for your listening and companionship. May the peace and gentleness of Christ, who is meek and humble of heart, be always with you and your family. With love, and see you again.